Hello and welcome to today's Career Month program. My name is Adam Sylvain and I work with the Alumni Career Development Team here at the University of Chicago in Hyde Park. I'm delighted to welcome you to our webinar entitled Interview Hero, the 3 Skills You Need to Ace Any Interview. Today we will hear from alumna Angela Guido, who runs Career Protocol, the web's most refreshing destination for no-nonsense career advice and professional development programs. Previously, Angela earned her MBA at Chicago Booth and worked for the Boston Consulting Group. She also has a professional background in teaching, training, and screenwriting, which shape her current work in different ways. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to cede the floor to Angela.
Okay, hello everybody. Good, just barely afternoon, I think, where most of you are. I'm going to come on the camera for just a second and say hello so you can see my face. Here I am. But I have a really action-packed show for you here, and it's all about the slides. So without further ado, let's get to it. This is the 3 skills you need to ace any interview. And I always like to start by sharing the slogan of my company, which is "Work is supposed to be fun." Let's not forget this today. Hopefully there will be some reminders as we go throughout the day. So Adam introduced me. Thanks so much for giving the high points there, Adam. I want to just talk through a couple of things on this page because I want you to know what you're getting into today. So I do have a background in teaching and philosophy. You're going to see this session is a little bit philosophical. And I have experience both as a management consultant and as a recruiter at a management consulting firm. So I've spent a lot of time thinking through interviews and what trips people up and what makes them challenging for people. And of course, I've been on the other side of that myself many times, having failed in numerous interviews. You're going to hear a little bit about that as we go today. And then I just also want to point to the fact that I'm an introvert. So prone to social awkwardness, not all that comfortable talking about myself. And I learned the hard way how to basically how to survive in interviews. And that's what I'm going to share with you today. The uniting factor in all of these things is that I'm a student of human nature. And so I think it's really important. If we want work to be fun, we need to take into account the fact that we're all human, and therefore we need to work with human nature. So let me get a sense of who's here today. That's a little bit about me. Adam, can you go ahead and launch the poll? And let me just get a sense of where all you are at. So go ahead and just pick the answer that fits best with where you're at in your career. And this kind of goes from early on to later. If you just kind of look at the letters, and I'll be quiet while you guys respond to that.
All right, looks like we're almost have everyone voting, so we'll give just one more minute here.
Okay, I can keep going, right, while we're waiting?
Absolutely, yep.
Okay, so here's our agenda for today. We're going to talk about the problem with interviews. We're going to talk about the 3 innate skills that you already have that are going to make you successful in interviews. And much more importantly, we're going to talk about how to marshal those skills under stress, because let's face it, interviews are stressful. And then I have an announcement about a book that's coming very soon. I'm going to tell you about it towards the end of the session. So let's get started with the problem with interviews.
Here are your poll results.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So looks like we got people in a bunch of different places, but a lot of you are on the cusp of a career pivot. And most of you, it looks like almost 90% of you are in some kind of transition. And the thing about transitions that are tricky, Adam, I think the slides are acting up. Can you see? Here we go. Can you see the slide with the interview?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I love this picture because I think it really captures the feeling of interviews. I think we've all been in this moment. You know, it's not like you're going to die. It's not like the boogeyman is after you, but it's a tense moment. It's a little bit stressful. And it's not just the interview itself that's stressful, it's everything that the interview represents. So for those of you, which is the majority of you, who are going through some kind of a career pivot, it probably feels a little bit like this. You're headed out into uncharted territory. There are a lot of unknowns. You're looking at potentially a new industry, a new company, a new product, a new team, a new boss, a lot of things that you're going to have to deal with. You're leaving behind the solid ground of everything you've known so far. And if you're honest, when you look at the job description you're targeting, you probably feel a little bit like this. You're not quite ready to fill the clothes of the job that you're applying for. And to be honest, if you're doing your career right, this is how you should feel. So I know that we're dealing with a lot of University of Chicago alumni and students on this webinar, and I know that all of you are thinking ambitiously. So whatever job you're targeting next is going to be a stretch role, and you're probably not going to feel 100% confident that you're ready for that job. And that's a good scenario. But of course, it doesn't bode all that well for interviews. Kind of makes you feel like this. This is definitely how I felt as I was going through interviews at the various stages in my life that I've been through interviews. But the good news is that there's one thing, one simple thing that all companies are looking for. It's this one quality that is going to make you competitive for any job. And that is, all companies are looking for leaders of consequence. I'm going to tell you what this means in a minute, but here's why this is important. Business is all about growth. And by business, I mean the world, right? Even if you're going into the arts or nonprofit or education or government, it's still all about being better tomorrow than we are today, being bigger, expanding the pie, expanding resources, expanding revenues. And growth is fundamentally all about people. So companies, organizations need people who can make things happen. They need people who can influence, who can collaborate, who have vision. This is true even if you're applying for an entry-level position. This is what companies are looking for. So leaders of consequence are the people who make things happen in organizations and lead their fellow men and women. So what does it mean to be a leader of consequence? Well, I'm going to break this down into 3 qualities, and we're going to work with each of them. And the good news is, like I said, you already have these qualities within you. So all we're doing today is looking to bring them out and polish them in this very stressful situation of the interview. So leaders of consequence are connected, they are wise, and they're inspiring. And all three of these are important, and they're a little bit different. So let's talk about each one. And let's talk about how to be these things under stress. Because remember, I said these are innate qualities you have. Whether they come out in a stressful situation is a different question. So let's look at connection first. And I think we can all agree that human connection is your birthright. This is something that you were born already knowing how to do. I mean, just think about how many connections you've made in your life: friends, family, coworkers, even pen pals, people on the internet that you've connected with and formed a natural human connection. We're programmed to do this. We don't have to try very hard to make connections with other human beings. So this is a skill that you already have, and it's already very well developed. So you can trust it. You can have confidence in it. Now, still, it's hard in this moment, right? It's a little bit hard to connect with the human being on the other side of the table in this situation. And the reason for that, I'm going to argue, is that we tend to think of the interview as a test. You guys are U of C alums, so you're really good at taking tests. You're super sharp, and there's really very little in life, I feel the same way, that's as satisfying as just crushing a test. But the truth is that an interview isn't a test. Now, that's not to say that there won't be some math involved in a given recruiting process. If you're interviewing for consulting firms, you're going to have to go through case interviews, which is a whole different thing. Jobs on Wall Street are going to have modeling tests. I'm not talking about any of that today. That's a separate thing, and definitely you need to prepare for that. All I'm talking about today is the interview part, the conversation about you and your life and your accomplishments. And that part of the conversation is really not a test. But we think of it that way, and because we think of it as a test, we think that what we're supposed to do is say the right things and make sure they know you're a good fit, look smart, appear like the perfect candidate, tell the whole truth, perhaps on the other side of the coin that leads to oversharing. So we have all of these insecurities that come up when we believe that we're being judged by the other person. I actually had an interviewer who looked quite a lot like this. And in my mind, whenever I was getting ready for interviews, the person I was envisioning was always someone kind of like this, or worse, like this, some faceless person who's going to judge you and, of course, find you to be inadequate and then block the way to your goal. When you think of the interview as a test, it's very hard not to see the interviewer this way, because all human beings hate the feeling of being judged. It's just how we're wired. So if that's your attitude, you're likely to end up in a state that's, fearful, defensive, reactive. I think you guys can probably all remember a moment in your interviews where you felt this way. In fact, let me get a show of hands. Raise your hand, click the little hand raising button in your interface there if you can remember feeling like this at some point in an interview. Maybe not every interview, maybe not the whole interview, but once or twice you can remember feeling a little bit like this. Yeah, a lot of hands going up here. Exactly. I certainly spent most of my 20s in this whole state. Okay. So is that the state of a leader of consequence? Not so much, right? So if you're viewing the interview as a test, you're really setting yourself up to not exhibit the quality that they're looking for. Because look, you're not going to be able to lead if you're afraid of people. This emotion translates, whether you realize it or not. People are picking up on these signals. This is what we call the 80% of communication that is nonverbal, or sometimes we call it 90% of communication that's nonverbal. It's emotion. It's how you're feeling. So you really need to shift your mindset about interviews. And I recommend that you do this. It's not a test. Let that idea go completely. If they've invited you to interview, you've already cleared some of their criteria. They want to talk to you. They want to get to know you. So instead of viewing the interview as a test, view it as the beginning of a relationship. So I recommend that you adopt the friendship mindset. What does that look like? Well, it means that your interviewer is just a friend you haven't met. That's easy, right? You can imagine that the interviewer is already your friend, and hold that in your mind. If you have an interview coming up, I recommend that you practice this thought a little bit every day, that your interviewer is your friend. Because why not? It's all imagined anyway. That they're judging you is imagined, and that they're your friend is imagined. You have control over how you view things. So here are some practical ways to execute this. Put your phone away. As soon as you enter the building, as soon as you enter the place where you're going to be interviewing, put your phone away and be present. Smile at everyone, make confident eye contact, develop a warm, firm handshake. You've probably heard this advice a million times, but you'd be surprised how many people haven't actually worked on their handshake and made it one that's inviting and friendly. So get some feedback, work on that. But here's the secret sauce on this page. Practice holding the mindset that everyone else in the world is already your friend. This trick will transform a lot more. This will transform your whole life, going well beyond interview performance. But it's going to make connecting with your interviewer that much easier. It's going to put you at ease, and it's going to keep you out of a reactive and fearful mindset. So try this one out. Now let's talk about wisdom. So we've dealt with mindset. Now let's talk about the content of your communication, because of course you're going to be talking a lot in the interview. So here's your friendly interviewer, and she is going to try to get to know you. So her job in the interview is to really try to get to know you and to decide, does she like you? Is she going to advocate for you? Is she going to champion you in the recruiting process? And here's your mantra, just to throw back to what we just did. My interviewer is my friend, and I'm just trying to help him or her get to know me better. If you make this your attitude in the interview, you're going to have a lot more fun, believe me. I have a whole story about this, but I don't think I have time to tell it. So maybe I'll tell it at the end if we don't have any questions. Okay, so in fit interviews, you're going to encounter 4 main question types. You've got the first one, which is typically walk me through your resume. Then there's behavioral questions, point blank questions, why questions. I'm going to talk about the first 2 today. And I'm going to start with behavioral questions. You guys have probably all seen these before. You've probably had behavioral interviews before. It's questions like this. Tell me about a leadership experience. Tell me about a time you worked with a team. Tell me about a challenging professional relationship, and so forth and so on. It's where the interviewer is really inviting you to expand on your experiences. And in behavioral questions, you're mostly going to talk about these moments. Most of those questions are getting at successes. And even when they're not, even when you're talking about mistakes and failures, you're always going to want to allude to a later success or a way in which you learned or grew from the mistake or failure. So you're always going to be talking about positive moments and wins in the interview. This is going to make up the bulk of the conversation. But the thing to realize is that wisdom doesn't develop in these moments. Have you ever noticed that? Have you ever noticed that you don't learn quite as much when you're winning? And it's really these moments, right? It's really these moments where we learn the most, where we grow, and where we earn our own personal wisdom. So, I like to point out the difference between knowledge and wisdom. So knowledge these days is everywhere. You just open Google and you have access to the entirety of the history of human knowledge. You can find the most beautiful pictures of cakes you can possibly imagine on every corner of Pinterest and lots of other websites. But to then go and actually make that cake or try to make that cake is an entirely different experience. But it's really only from making the cake and eating the cake, stuffing it in your face, where you really learn what the cake is all about. That's where you develop wisdom. So the difference between knowledge and wisdom is experience. The majority of a behavioral interview is about your experience. It's not about what you know. It's about the wisdom you've gained through trial and frequently error. There's another really important thing you need to understand about humans, and I'm probably not telling you any news on this page. Emotions drive human decisions. There's been a lot of science around this. Even when we think about the rational reasons for and against, we do the pros and cons list, we build the spreadsheet. Ultimately, humans are primarily driven by their emotions when they're making decisions. And in fact, the whole hiring process is organized this way. So this is a slide I have to credit to a fellow U of C alum, friend of mine, Nicholas Constantinesco. He developed this page, and I really like it. I use it in just about every single one of my decks. Because when you get into that interview room, it means that you have the appropriate qualifications. It's really expensive for employees to take time off and just chat with you. So they're not interviewing you unless they believe you're a good investment of their time, which means that they already believe that you're more or less qualified for the job. So the interview isn't about that. It's not about your resume. It's not about what you have achieved. It's really about the emotional factors of who you are. Like, are you likable? Do they experience connection with you? Do they trust you? This is what the interview process is mostly all about. And just check with your own experience. Haven't you noticed that you tend not to really like that guy who's always winning, right? Nobody likes that guy. He's not likable. So you got to think about how the interviewer feels about you is more important than what she thinks, because people like to work with people they like. This is never going to change. No matter how much AI transforms the workplace, no matter how much screening of resumes and even partial interviews are done by AI, people are still going to make decisions based on what they want. And people want to work with people they like. So this means that you can't just tout your achievements. You can't make a behavioral interview just about looking good and seeming awesome, because you're going to lose emotional points on that front. What you're going for here is confident humility. This is completely different from just pure confidence, because it reveals the parts of you and your experience where you had to really learn through trial and error. So the behavioral interview is really about sharing your unique experience. And by the way, it's your human moments that are your most compelling. I learned this through my pursuit of screenwriting. So one of my resume bullets I'm really proud of is that I'm a failed screenwriter. I studied screenwriting for years. I tried to write a ton of screenplays and I never managed to finish one, but I learned a lot about how we tell stories and what stories even mean. So the storytelling, oh, sorry. So before I get to the storytelling rule, probably you've encountered one or two frameworks that you've used in preparing for behavioral interviews. There's the STAR framework and the CAR framework. And just for the next like 5 minutes here, I'd like you to put these aside, because these are not actually storytelling frameworks. These are I don't even know how to explain it, but they're taking the emotion out of the story, and they're being a little bit vague in the place here, the action part, where it's actually most important to do something very specific. So just set these aside for a minute. I'm going to show you a new framework that you might want to try on. And so here's storytelling rule number 3. This is part of a much bigger story, a much bigger conversation about stories. One second, my Dropbox is talking to me. Sorry about that. Okay, so conflict defines the story. This is the essence of what it means to tell a story. So I'm going to do a really quick example with you guys right now. This is like lightning round 5-minute exercise. And we're going to practice answering a question. And it's just this question: tell me about an accomplishment. So pick an accomplishment in your life. No one's going to speak. No one's going to look at what you write or what you jot down, but this will be much more meaningful for you if you actually try this out as we go through the next 5 minutes. So everybody take just a second and pick an accomplishment from your life that you want to look at and get a little bit of a deeper cut at it. You can choose anything. It can be something that you've used a lot in interviews. It can be something recent. It can be something from a long time ago. It can be personal. It can be professional. Just pick any accomplishment, and we're going to work with that for the next 3 or 4 minutes. Okay, so now we're going to get at these moments en route to the victory, right? The story has a happy ending. All stories have happy endings. That's storytelling rule number 8. But we're going to look at these moments before we get to the victory. So you're going to take a look right now at the conflict in that experience, in your story. Conflict is a really simple thing. It happens when the protagonist, in this case you, wants something and has to overcome obstacles to get it. That's all. It's very simply, you want something and something is standing in the way. So with respect to the accomplishment that you chose, take a moment and reflect on what are the obstacles that you overcame to accomplish the outcome. What was challenging about the situation? Just take maybe 15 seconds and try and remember what was standing in your way. What were the obstacles? Be as specific as you can. Jot down a couple of notes if you want to. I'll be quiet for just a second while you do that. Okay, so when you're defining your conflict for a given story, for a given experience, this is the single sentence that underlies every story about your life. I wanted something, but I had to overcome something else. So as you're preparing for your behavioral interviews and you're going to talk about an accomplishment, talk about a leadership experience, talk about a teamwork experience, you need to think through this sentence. I wanted something. What did you want? Be specific. And then what did you have to overcome? So here's an example from my life. I wanted to impress my teammates and do a great job for the client, but I had to overcome a compressed timeline, an unmotivated client, and my own complete inexperience. So this is a story about my very first project as a management consultant. And this is what I was dealing with. So the thing I wanted was, basically to look good, but also to help the client. And I had to overcome three pretty big obstacles. We didn't have enough time. The client was not super engaged, and I had no idea what I was doing. So this is an example. And notice how personal this is. So the thing I wanted was what I wanted personally. The thing that was in the way was my personal obstacles, the things that were blocking my success, not necessarily the project or the company, but in this case, it was what was my personal obstacle. And then once you've defined your conflict sentence, you want to think about the choices that you made. So in other words, how did you think and feel about those challenges? How did you strategize to overcome them? And then what one or two actions made the biggest difference in surmounting the obstacles? This is the part of the story that's most important. This is where we come to really understand who you are, what your values are. This is where the listener is going to connect with you emotionally. And it's where we're going to really understand where your wisdom has come from. We're going to get to bear witness to wisdom being developed in the course of this experience. So let me just quickly model a story, and I'll use the example that I gave you before so that you can just kind of see how this all comes together. This is a really rich topic, by the way. I'm not really doing it justice in these 10 minutes, but hopefully this will at least give you a glimpse of the importance of conflict when you're talking about your own experiences. So here's the story. So it was my first consulting project, and I had to make the contract that would dictate the post-merger integration of two really big consumer goods companies. The timeline, of course, as it always is, was tight, and I had no idea what I was doing. I was just fresh out of business school. My client counterpart, Lenny, failed to keep order at meetings, and the process started to fall apart when other team members challenged his authority. Okay, so this was the conflict. Now, I decided that since I was just, effectively a kid, just fresh out of business school, that the team wasn't going to really listen to me. I didn't have any authority there. So if I wanted to be successful, I was first going to have to bolster Lenny's ability to own the process. So I spent a lot of time coaching him before our process team meetings. I scheduled meetings with him before every plenary session. I gave him pep talks and mock Q&A sessions with him based on the challenges that I knew the other members of the team were going to throw at him. And eventually there was this very cinematic turning point in the project. In one meeting, this guy, Mike, who was Lenny's number one antagonist, fired this, very snarky question at Lenny about how we were going to circulate the PowerPoint to the law firm and, some logistical challenge that he was nitpicking. And Lenny had the answer. And he said it with this incredible confidence. And it was like the whole room was quiet. And you could see he grew in stature by 6 inches after this moment. And it was truly a turning point. It was when he began to really own the process and carry it forward like it was his. And when he did that, the whole rest of the team started to follow him. there was a lot to do between then and the end. We had to manage a really giant spreadsheet. We had to run it all through legal and create this giant legal document. But once Lenny took charge, it was really smooth sailing from then forward. So in the end, the contract was a success. The merger went off without a hitch. The CEO was really happy about it. I learned a ton about client management. And most importantly, Lenny got a promotion. That was the thing that was most meaningful to me in that experience, is that after 10 years, he got his first promotion. So you can see the framework here at the top. These are the 4 C's. This is my framework for storytelling. And it really allows you to do a lot in a very short amount of time. That was about a 2-minute answer to a question, tell me about an accomplishment. You can see that an answer like this, when I shared the challenge and the choices that I made to overcome that challenge, you can see that you really learned a lot about my values. You can see how I think, what's important to me. You got to see my weaknesses, so you got to see my humanity. I hopefully came off as humble because I didn't have all the answers. I had to figure it out as I went along. You can see resilience, you can experience emotion, and importantly, you can see wisdom. So this is what you're going for in answers to behavioral questions, and really in answers to any question. You want the interviewer to say, wow, I really feel like I got to know you and I like you. This is really the best case scenario in a fit interview. So here's how to take this idea into your life. When you're preparing responses to behavioral questions, you want to answer these questions. What obstacles did you overcome to accomplish the outcome? What was challenging about it? What was your strategy? So what was your thought process? How did you decide you were going to operate in order to beat the obstacles? And then what are the 1 or 2 or 3 key choices and actions that you took that drove the positive outcome in the face of difficulty? You want to explore all of your experiences with these questions in mind, and it's going to give you a lot more to say in these conversations than everyone else that you're competing with. And you want to shape your stories around the conflict that you faced. All right, so we've covered being connected and wise. Now let's talk about being inspiring. So typically in an interview, the first question is something like this. Tell me about yourself, walk me through your resume. It's something kind of vague, kind of big picture. It's giving you both the chance to settle in and, be present, leave behind your day and get into the conversation. This is a make or break moment, you guys. Most of us don't take tell me about yourself or walk me through your resume very seriously as a question because it's so broad. It's like, how could you go wrong? If we're thinking of the interview as a test, it's almost like the test hasn't started yet. So we're kind of off our guard on a question like this. But this is actually the most important conversation, the most important question in the entire conversation because it's the first one. So you don't want, again, if you've adopted the friendship mindset, hopefully you're not sitting there just trying to survive this moment. You're actually going to be able to take ownership of it. So this is someone that you're going to know, hopefully, for a long time. If you go to work at this company, the person who's interviewing you is someone that you're going to have a relationship with for some extended period of time. And you're setting the stage for that relationship right here in this first moment. This is where you must take ownership of your story, take ownership of that moment, and really present yourself in the way you want to be known. So this is what most people do. So this is one of like 8 or 9 frameworks for how to introduce yourself that I talk about in my book that I'll tell you about in just a minute. But this is kind of everybody's default answer. You start with a little bit about college, what you majored in and why. Maybe you talk a little bit about extracurricular activities. Then you go on to talk about your first job and why you did that job and maybe something you learned or contributed there. Then you go on to why you switched to job 2 and talk a little bit about that one and so forth and so on. And then hopefully you conclude with something that's relevant to the present conversation. So why you're excited to be interviewing with the target firm or with the business school. I work with a lot of people who are applying to business schools, so that's why this one is here. By the way, if you are applying to business school, this is actually an okay approach for an MBA application, because in an MBA application, they're interviewing thousands of people to choose hundreds of people. And so they do kind of want to get a sense of your motivations. This isn't still the best approach for everyone, even in that context. But if you're applying for a job and the vast majority of you are staring a job interview in the face, this is really a terrible choice. This is a bad choice for most job interviews, and especially if you're making any kind of career pivot or switch. Here's why. The recruiting manager doesn't care why you did the things you did. Most of the things that you're going to talk about in that approach have nothing to do with the job you're talking about and interviewing for right now. They have nothing to do with the firm you're speaking to, and your interviewer just can't connect with any of that because it's not relevant to her. So she really wants to know, remember, that you're a leader of consequence, that you're able to connect, that you're wise, and in this moment, this first moment of the conversation, this is the most important moment for you to be inspiring. And talking about why you did the things you did, for most people, isn't actually the most inspiring way that you can present yourself. So how do you make an inspiring first impression? Well, you want to do two things. First, you want to ask yourself this question. This is a big question, and I really encourage you to take some time and really think about this. How do I want to be known to this person who may become a lifelong professional friend and collaborator? This is really your moment to shine. There are no rules here. Remember, this isn't a test. You can talk about whatever you want to talk about in that first question. So how do you really want to be known? What part of you do you want to put forward? And then you want to leverage the irresistible power of enthusiasm. Enthusiasm always works in conversation. It will always make you come alive, and aliveness is contagious. So what makes you come alive when you talk about it? Well, if you're like most people, it's the stuff that you love, it's what matters to you, what you're curious about, and what you want. Most human beings get a little light in their eyes when they talk about things in this realm. So you want to choose an introduction framework that allows you to focus on what you love, what matters to you, what you're curious about, and or, doesn't have to be all of these, could just be one or could be two, what you want in your career. So let me just, again, mock a really cursory example for you of what that might look like. So let's imagine the interviewer says, walk me through your resume. You could say, well, I'd say that my career has been characterized by two major themes: human development and communication. In each role I've held, whether it was part of my mandate or not, I've sought ways to develop the people around me and improve the effectiveness of communication in my organizations. In my first job, ... Now I'm going to go on to elaborate on one or more of these in each role that I've held, or if you've had a lot of roles, okay? So if you're in a position where you've already had 5 or 6 or 7 jobs, you're probably not going to talk through each one of those. You're going to talk through maybe the most important 2 or 3, or maybe you're going to summarize your career in terms of, pre-MBA, post-MBA, or whatever is the turning point for you. So you want to keep the answer to about 2 to 4 minutes. But while you're talking about yourself, you really want to choose to focus on the things that you've really loved in your career, or the things that have been really important to you, or the things that you've sought and wanted the most. This is what's going to make you come alive. So here's the practical execution of this one. You want to use the walk me through your resume to share your values openly and with enthusiasm. Take ownership of that moment and of who you are. So you're applying for a job that has a job description. They're looking for certain skills, certain experiences, certain qualities. But all of that is going to come out in the course of the conversation. As you begin to craft your walk me through your resume, you do want to make it make sense. This is kind of the bonus round here. It's to choose career themes, or choose to focus on the elements of your career that you've really loved that resonate with the role you're seeking. Okay, so this is common sense. You want to connect with the role and with the person you're speaking to. So undoubtedly you have multiple passions. Focus on the one or two or three that are most relevant to the role you're seeking, but really allow the choice to be driven by what's most important to you. Because this is the thing, aliveness and enthusiasm, while it always works, it really cannot be faked. If you're just going through the motions here, you're not going to get the juice of inspiration. You're not really going to inspire the person you're talking to. And that's really what this is all about. So you have to focus on the things that really matter to you. So ideally, there are some things that really matter to you that resonate with the role you're seeking. And here's the super bonus round. I actually recommend that you pursue only those opportunities that resonate with what makes you come alive. We live in an extraordinary time. Anything is possible. If we're not pursuing ways to have an impact and to make our lives work that also make us come alive, we're doing ourselves a tremendous disservice and the planet, frankly. So that's it. We've covered how to be connected, how to be wise, and how to be inspiring. We've talked about the friendship mindset, confident humility, and enthusiasm. And now, if you found any of this interesting or useful, I want to tell you how you can get a whole lot more, because this was criminally short. We managed to cover like maybe 3% of what I have to say on these subjects. So the great news is that, it used to be that if you wanted to get access to any of this information, you had to pay a ton of money to work with me as a coach. But I finally managed to put everything I know, or at least most of what I know, into a book. And it's coming out really soon, December 11th. I'm incredibly excited about it. Also really nervous because I've never published a book before. So here it is, coming December 11th. If you are interested in helping me make the book a success, in other words, like checking it out, sharing it with people, buying it in the first week when it's super, super cheap, please go to this link, careerprotocol.com/Chicago, and sign up for the launch list. And then you'll get a couple of emails from me in the next few weeks letting you know about the launch and when to go get the book. And then you'll also be on my insiders list, so you'll get occasional wisdom from me. But of course, you can unsubscribe anytime, as one is wont to do. So would love for all of you to check this out. I'm super, super excited about it. So there you go. And Adam, I did it. Wow, I did it in 40 minutes. I can't even believe it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Angela. At this time, happy to moderate some Q&A. So we do have a few questions in queue, but if anybody has a question that they would like addressed during our time here this hour, please do submit those questions to the questions box, and I will pose them to Angela. So first question, how do you ace a question regarding requested compensation? What should be the approach, and what should you not say in that scenario?
This is like literally the hardest question. This is the hardest question I think that anyone could be asked. And it's the one question. It's great that you're leading with this because it's the one question that I don't really have a pat answer for. Let me tell you what I have come to believe about this question. But ultimately, it's sometimes you can't win. Okay. So my recommendation in general is, first of all, to have done your research and to really be ready to put forward a number that you can stand by. And because there's a chance that you're going to be pressed, no matter how you dodge it, to just answer the question. And at some point it becomes problematic if you just say, well, let's talk about it later. Well, let's talk about, if they're going to make you answer it, they're going to make you answer it. So you want to go in with a number and you want to have done some research. And there's a lot of information on the internet. If you go out and read about how to answer this question, there's a lot of great advice about, for example, if you're hoping to get like a 20% raise, like a huge raise, an amount of money that's not really tied in any way to the amount of money that you've made before, there's a lot of different ways you can handle that question that are going to not force you to reveal what you've been paid in the past, or at least they're going to help you do it in a different way. So definitely do some other research. because this isn't my specialty. But my recommendation is to answer it with a let's chat later. So something along the lines of, it's a really good question. I need to think a little bit more about it, and I would love to have that conversation if we feel like this is a mutual fit. And ideally, you want to move the compensation conversation out of the interview into an offer negotiation situation. So that's kind of that's like the first line of defense that I suggest. And if they come back at you with it, yeah, but what do you expect me to get paid? You can dodge it probably one more time before then you might actually have to give them an answer. So that's what I would recommend. But this is a really tough one because yeah, it's just you don't want to be having that conversation in the interview room. You want to be having it after they've decided to hire you, when you have a little bit more leverage.
All right. Well, it looks like people just need that little extra nudge because we've got a bunch more questions coming in. So
Okay.
next one we have here is, what advice do you have for career changers and ... facing group interviews? So there are a couple questions I think about group interview dynamics, and I think you could probably approach that from multiple interviewers or interviewees. So yeah, any
Yeah,
insight there?
so the notion of being a leader of consequence is still in play. The dynamics of a group interview are entirely different. Okay, so they're not going to be asking you questions about yourself. In fact, you're probably not going to be talking about yourself at all. You're just going to be you're just going to be solving a problem with a bunch of other people. That's typically how it works. It's some version of a case interview or a meeting simulation, and they want to see you, work together to solve a problem. In that case, you want to keep in mind all of these same ideas. You want to be connected, so you want to engage with everyone else in the room. You want to be inclusive. You want to collaborate effectively, and then you want to share your experiences, share your wisdom, and you want to be inspiring when the moment demands. So if you're talking about like that kind of a group interview, it's the same principles apply, though of course your task is different. And then if you're talking about a group interview where you are, so I think there's another kind of group interview that you might be talking about where several people are interviewing you at the same time. So there's three of them and one of you. And again, all the same rules apply. You want to show confident humility and openness in talking about your experiences. You want to inspire at the right moment, and you want to be connected. Those people are your friends too. Use the friendship mindset.
Great. I have a few questions also on the topic of gaps in experience. So if you're returning to work after a while out, how do you approach that? And particularly, how do you answer the question that might come up in an interview about that gap in your experience?
So this starts to get into the realm of point blank questions, which was not a question type that we talked about today. And I write extensively about it in my book. So there's a whole lot more, like I said, there's a whole lot more beyond on every topic, on every question. I even talk about the salary question in the book. So there's a whole lot more in there. But just briefly to set up a point blank question, it's basically a question where they kind of nail you, right? It's like, what's your leadership style? Or what do you do in your free time? Or what's your biggest weakness? Or in this case, what's wrong with you? You have a career gap. And so you want to approach this question in two ways. You want to be willing and able to be vulnerable, but you also want to be forthcoming about your values. So when you're trying to explain a career gap, that's kind of like a weakness question. And I have a framework for this that I call the WIMP framework. So you want to talk about the weakness. You want to talk about the impact of that weakness. Then you want to put the emphasis on mitigating factors. So if you have a career gap, the mitigating factors would be all of the relevant experience that you amassed before the gap, and even things that you've done during the gap that have continued to build certain skills and experiences that might be relevant to this position. And then you want to, the last part of the framework is a plan. So then you want to show them that you are proactively thinking about how you're going to address whatever remaining weakness might be there. So let's say you've taken 3 or 4 years off and you're looking to come back into a role that's related to some of the stuff that you've done in the past. You might say explicitly, well, I absolutely expect to have to work a little bit harder than, my peers in the first 3 to 6 months, not only to get up to speed on firm culture, because this is a new environment to me, but also in like really ramping up my efficiency, or whatever the lingering concern is vis-a-vis the gap. And then you say, I'm definitely gonna have to work on that, and here's my plan. I'm gonna, enlist the support of my manager. I'm going to, and really think through what are all the things that you're going to do to remedy that weakness in this specific environment.
Great. I have another question. This is asking you to go back to an earlier point in your presentation where you mentioned you might have a story that I don't know if we have time for it now, but I think it was around the time that you were talking about connecting and viewing your
Yeah,
interviewer as a
so
friend.
so I have this epic story of my journey to management consulting, and it's I again, if you want to hear all the gory details of my life, it's a lot of it's in the book. So I I was a philosophy major, then I was an English teacher, then I did a little bit of like HR strategy, and then I went to business school at the University of Chicago. So I was like the one of the few like just completely like non-mathematical, no business experience whatsoever people in my class. And I decided that I wanted to recruit for management consulting, which is exactly what career services said not to do. And so I was like, screw that. I'm only going to recruit for consulting. And I recruited for consulting only for summer internships. And I managed to make it to the final round with most companies, but I didn't get any offers. And then I did a lot of soul searching over the summer and really tried to debrief with myself and figure out like what went wrong, because I had prepared for cases. I probably could have done better on the cases. But what I decided was that the thing that screwed me up in the interviews wasn't the cases. It was actually the fit interview. It was that I was like a deer in headlights. I was terrified of my interviewers, and I was not at all confident in my own experiences or my own stories. So, and that just rubbed off. It just kind of polluted the whole conversation, so that even my cases, they weren't fun. It was like I was just barely surviving the experience. So I spent a lot of time that summer and in the months leading up to recruiting for full time trying to really master my own stories, get to know myself, and to develop this inner confidence, that I'm now calling the friendship mindset, so that I could like really connect, like really make those conversations worthwhile for myself and for them. And it worked. I got two offers. I had an offer from McKinsey and BCG coming out of second year. So it it's these are soft skills that I'm talking about today, probably to an audience that likes the hard skills more. That's what I tend to find. And the hard skills are very important, but the more senior you get in your career, the more important these softer skills become. The more it's about your ability to connect with other people and inspire them, the more it's about your ability to understand human systems and dynamics and influence, even when things are stressful and difficult. This requires a very high degree of emotional intelligence. It also requires that people like you, that you're someone that people want to know and want to have on their team. So yeah, so I've kind of dedicated the rest of my career in my post consulting days to these skills and helping people develop them, because I think it's ultimately what makes work fun.
Great. I think we have time for maybe one last question. I did want to acknowledge we've gotten a lot of questions and even some advice too regarding the compensation negotiation question, and did want to let everybody know, and I'll remind you at the end as well, that tomorrow's Career Month presentation is all on the topic of negotiation. So we hope everyone here will return and join us for that as well. Let's end with another question that I saw come in from a few attendees, and this is how do you address if the question about why you left your previous position, or if you had some difficulties or yeah, not some not positive experiences at a prior position. How do you
Yeah.
discuss that in an interview
Yeah,
context?
very good. So this is really the essence of storytelling. So the thing you need to understand about storytelling is that when you're talking about yourself and your life, you are the author, you are the editor, and you are the cinematographer, or let's call it framer of your story. So they don't know what happened in your last job. And even if there was unpleasantness, chances are it's not the whole story. When you leave jobs, typically it's like it wasn't a fit, you wanted different opportunities. Typically there was something that you were also running towards in addition to running away from. And even if there wasn't a specific job or a specific opportunity that you were running towards, undoubtedly there was an experience that you wanted that you weren't getting in that job. So I always recommend that you frame your experiences and your stories in terms of the positive. So don't talk about that boss that was a pain in the butt that was causing problems for you and ultimately pulled the trigger and asked you to leave. Instead, talk about the fact that you were seeking new learning opportunities in line with whatever it is that you move towards in your next job. It's always your choice what you call their attention to. And I recommend that you call their attention to what you want them to see. Now, if they ask you a specific question about a problem in your last job, because let's say that information has somehow become known, well, then you're going to have to deal with it. And that's more of like going to the WIMP framework. It's where you talk about either a mistake that you made or something that was a weakness that you've since worked to really develop or are continuing to work on developing. There will be times in the conversation where you do have to talk about weaknesses and failures and mistakes. And in fact, those are some of the most important moments in the conversation because it's where you really get to show them what you're made of. I have, I think, 2 whole chapters on this in the book because talking about failure is critically important. But I don't recommend that you go there unless it's really in your best interest to do so or unless you're forced to. So when you're talking about leaving a role, don't talk about what you were running away from or, that you were forced out. Talk about what instead you were running towards. What were you seeking? What did you want? This goes back to the issue of enthusiasm. No one's enthusiastic about a job that went wrong, but you are enthusiastic about what came next and the possibilities that opened up and the ways in which you've grown since.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone, for participating, and a special thank you to Angela for sharing all of this great advice and perspective on interviewing. Those of you who've been following our Career Month programming since the start of November may know that we're nearing the end, but we do have 2 more webinars this week, including the presentation that I mentioned tomorrow, which is titled Negotiate to Win, Strategies to Land the Offer or Raise You Deserve. And our final event of Career Month 2018 will take place Thursday, November 29th at 12 p.m., as we'll be joined by alumnus Lou Augusta, who will present his top 7 lessons on empathy for executive leadership. We hope you will join us for these upcoming programs. And although Career Month ends this week, we also want you to know that our programming continues throughout December and into the new year. Please visit our events page at careers.uchicagoalumni.org for the most up-to-date schedule of events. Again, thank you, Angela, and thank you to all for attending today's presentation. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.